This week we're deep in the heart of West Wales, in an area with a warm and woolly past, for this is sheep country. Driving into Newcastle Emlyn, you're arrested at every turn by signs to the Woollen Museum. They're pointing east to Dyfed, the textile hotbed of the 19th century. This was the centre of the industrialised woolen industry, and today there's still a working mill here with machines and relics of a way of life that dominated this area only 100 years ago. The larger factories were producing flannel distributed by rail in huge quantities to the industrial markets of the South Wales coalfield. Flannel was a tough, hard-wearing cloth made into shirts, shawls and underwear. Later, during the First World War, flannel made the fortunes of local people as demand soared to make the uniforms for the thousands of soldiers heading for the front. Every town had its mills. Newcastle Emlyn had 4, one of which was built here on the banks of the river, which races past the castle, rebuilt in the times of Henry Tudor, and which gave the town its relatively modern title of Newcastle Emlyn. But the good times eventually ran out for the mill owners and industrialists of Dyfed. World War I marked the end of the road for many mills. The post-war slump of the 20s and 30s caused the market to collapse, and the number of factories in the area plummeted. This week in Newcastle Emlyn, you're not only reminded of the heritage of this area, but also signs are up announcing the arrival of the Antiques Roadshow. So let's now join our experts in the leisure centre.
Now, do take a seat. Thought it'd be much better to sit down comfortably rather than talk to you about this in the queue. How did you come by it?
It came to us almost by accident from a relative in Nairobi who we barely knew existed, and when he died, the solicitors sent it to my husband.
Because this actually has the most wonderful skin, this wonderful colour. And have you any idea of the age of it?
About 16-something.
16-something, yes. You've gone by the Crichton initials,
yes,
have you, there?
Yes.
The C up at the top, that will be the family name.
Yes.
And then the W, what's the other one? An S. That will be the husband and the wife. And this was normally done at the time of a marriage. Yes, we've got date letter there for 1660.
Yes.
Which in fact is 1660 to 1661. So it's, that is lovely, that ties up so perfectly. Let's have a look. Now that's rather interesting. Have you ever wondered what that scratches though?
No, not really.
That's actually where in the assay office they've taken the sample. They literally have a tool, looks a little bit like a chisel, and they scratch into it to take the sample for testing. Now there should be one, yes there it is, yes, underneath. So, have you thought about value?
No, I do have it insured.
What have you got it insured for? Come on.
I got it insured for £2,000.
Right, yes, that is a little bit low.
Yes.
I think at auction, I would be estimating that at about £15,000. And insurance should be at least 20,000.
Really?
So I think you need to add a naught to your insurance.
If you took a photograph of a piece of furniture, a good piece of furniture, against a plain background, you couldn't tell how big because the proportions are perfect. Yes. And you look at this, it could be 6 foot tall and 3-4 foot wide. As it is, it's not a miniature, but it's just the prettiest little cupboard I've ever seen. Lovely. And it's a family one. Family one. Any history with it at all?
Well, the only thing I can recollect is my mother kept saying that it was made from local timber from just over the valley, yeah?
Well, it's certainly made of fruit wood, and it's attained this most beautiful colour. The surface is lovely. I mean, it's just like a little bit of faded gold, really, isn't it? Arch panels to the top, this sort of Gothic style, and then classic Western Wales pattern, this frieze along the top, inset with just little tiny bits of marquetry, just a little cross-graining, just to give it a bit of life, a bit of colour. But it's very difficult to be precise about dating. You see, that inset moulding, that sort of moulding that either overhung the drawer front or was within it in this case, really is about sort of 1745 to 1780. And although we allow 30 years per generation, you're still going, that's way before.
It is, yes.
If we look at the draw lining itself, we've got a pine, this lining here, nice and new looking, nice and fresh and crisp, which it should be. Really and truly, I would have to say 1800, 1810 at the latest.
Yes.
A lot of Welsh furniture, particularly from the 1770s to 1820, will be made of planks of wood which taper. And so one opened up against another, and you get that angular look. It's just typical and beautiful. Love it, I love it. Nice colour. Now then, on the open market today, this would command a price between £6,000 and £7,000.
Would it really? My daughter will be pleased, because it's actually my daughter's at the moment. It's
Wonderful.
going
Well,
through the family.
May she
She'll be
long
very
enjoy
pleased.
it, and may it continue to remain in the family.
Certainly
Lovely
will.
thing to see.
Certainly will. Thanks very much.
Why do you like it?
The colours are
colours?
so beautiful. Green is my favourite colour,
Yes.
and it is so lovely.
Do you know anything about it?
Nothing.
Where did it come from?
I've no idea. My grandfather must have bought it many, many years ago. He died in 1915, and he was a sea captain.
He was a sea captain.
He was, yes.
And it all makes sense, because, of course, he travelled around.
Yes, he did.
He bought things. Was he a great hoarder and
Yes,
collector?
yes. He bought a lot of things.
And when was he
yes.
sailing? Roughly.
Well, he retired, I suppose, early 1900s,
Right.
when my mother was born.
Yes.
He had 6 sons. My mother was born, and he retired.
And he gave up.
He gave up the sea, yes.
But did he carry on collecting?
Oh, I think he must have
Yes.
done, actually.
Well, I think it's quite likely, therefore, he went to Holland in
Yes.
about 1900, 1904. This was made by a factory called Purmerend, or the town is called Purmerend.
Yes.
The factory, if you'll forgive my Dutch pronunciation, was run by a man called Brandtjes.
Yes.
And it was a very short-lived factory, 1895 to about 1904. It then was taken over and went into a larger group. But what it expressed in a very decorative way, was the European enthusiasm for Art Nouveau. You look at this and you think of Moorcroft, you think of a whole range of, perhaps William de Morgan, a whole range of similar potters of the 19th century, early 20th century, who were making decorative pottery. Now this is painted on earthenware, which of course is the traditional Dutch style, the Delftware style. This is, of course, not Delftware, which is blue and white. This is a multicolour technique, but based on recognisable flower forms. Now the greatest Dutch Art Nouveau factory was Rosenberg,
Yes.
who made very fine earthenwares and very fine porcelains of a different league altogether. But this was a sort of closely run rival, in a sense, of Rosenberg in terms of the decorative style and the style of painting. It's well marked on the base. In fact, you've got Purmerend, which is the area, you've got various decorators. It's a very well identified piece. But if you really wanted to sell it, I have to say you'd probably need to get on a boat and go to Holland and take it with you. Because
Really?
inevitably the market
I
for it in
see.
continental Europe is much more developed
Really?
than it is in Britain. If you took it down the road to your local antique shop, you'd be lucky to get £50, £100.
Yes, that's right.
If you went to Holland, you might get £1,000.
Yes, I see. Yes, that's
So,
true.
you know, it's £1,000 piece, but
Yes.
in the right market.
Who actually owns these?
My husband. It's taken me 2 years to persuade him to let them leave the house.
Why is that now?
Well, because it's a private, as far as I'm concerned, it's private, and I don't want people involved into my...
You sure now?
Yes, definitely.
Because you've
so.
come to the wrong place.
Oh, well, I'm not worried about you.
No. They're by somebody called Philip H. Rideout. They're worth about 150, £200 each, something like
Yeah.
that.
I within,
Virginia have.
yes, not for every borrowing knave. My master's want I must supply.
Let begging fellows go and buy.
1856. So it's what? It's a snuff box, is it?
I think it's for tobacco.
But how do you open it?
Well, you see,
Don't you press this button here and something happens? No? No, obviously not.
they weren't going to let anybody but themselves know the trick.
Oh, you pull the hinge apart.
There we go.
How ingenious. Isn't that clever?
Oh, I've been playing since I was about 16, 18.
Have you? And have you ever used this club?
Never, no.
A marvellous club.
Well, it was my husband's, and I don't know where he got it from. He was a golf professional.
Oh, was he?
And he had this in his shop for years.
Did he?
And then when he died, it was in his top bag. And I found it in there.
Where was he a professional?
At Cardigan Golf Club.
Well, this is a Scottish club.
Is it?
Yes, and it's called a Rake Iron.
A rake.
And it was used for when you were hitting the ball in wet grass or something like that.
I
It was
thought
thought
that.
that the drag would be more efficient with these gaps here and the ball would go further. It's about almost 100 years old. And you see on the points here the little decoration, the little floral and arrow decoration, which is very typical of Browns of Montrose. Well, there's a great interest these days in golf clubs and golf balls. A club like this is very rare and would be very sought after. But if it came up for auction today, I would be surprised if it fetched less than £3,000.
3,000?
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
Lovely, that's a surprise.
It's a very rare club.
Isn't it?
It's called a feathery, and it's the earliest form of modern style golf ball with an arrangement of hard-packed feathers within a sewn-up leather exterior. So any guesses as to value?
Well, we've got an idea that it might be worth a bit because we don't think there are too many of them around.
No, they're very rare. So it's a pity about the chip, but I think it's probably likely to bring around 10 to 15,000 pounds on the market.
Some good news. I wish we'd got some more of them.
So 1777, however, is going to take us well beyond your grandmother. Your grandmother's surname was Tarrant. So, in other words, it came from her paternal side. Sometimes pottery goes all the way down the maternal line and you lose the relevance of the initials, but that's jolly nice. Now, tell me, do you have any idea whether there was a pig farmer in the family?
None at all.
The scene we have here is it's rather a jolly scene considering the subject matter. The man slitting the pig's throat looks quite happy, and the pig only looks mildly discomforted by the fact his throat's being slit. And I don't see any bucket on the floor to collect what could be a very useful black pudding coming up. This mug was almost certainly made for somebody who was in this particular line of business. An English Delftware mug of this period is worth somewhere in the region of £500 to £800. With a date such as your date, it's probably worth in the region of £3,000 to £5,000. But with the pig scene, who knows what it could be worth? Because I think that you could perhaps multiply that even by 2.
That's lovely, isn't it? Is it for a man or a woman?
Woman.
Woman, yes. Yes. Big head. I've got a big head.
Do you know, this really is a good example by the Italian 19th century artist Ignace Spiridon. Could you tell me something of the immediate family history of the picture?
Well, it belongs to my aunt.
Right.
Her first husband bought it probably before the war,
Right.
but we don't know an awful lot about how much he paid for it.
Right. Well, the picture was painted, although it's not dated, was painted at the latter part of the 19th century, perhaps in the 1870s. It's an example of what we term chocolate box art, but the better end of that meaning, if you like. High quality, very finely finished. It's interesting, it's on panel, the best medium to be painted on. It's a very stable surface and has been really responsible, I think, for its condition today. It needs really to bring it up to first-class condition would be to remove the glass and have it lightly cleaned. Although it's a small picture, its value today would be somewhere in the region at auction of around £8,000 to £10,000.
So your ancestor was John Pascoe Grenville?
It was indeed, yes.
Really? And tell me about him.
He was an admiral in the Brazilian Navy.
Yes.
He was born in 1800 in Devon, of an able family. He was a direct descendant of Sir Richard Grenville, and he went to sea at 10. And by the time he was about 16. He was coming back from one of his trips, saw Lord Cochrane's squadron, who was at that time privateering against the Spanish and the Portuguese, and through family representation, joined up with them. And
then he joined the Brazilian Navy, yes, and went right through and died in
1869 as Consul General of Brazil at Liverpool.
In Liverpool?
In Liverpool.
He represented
Brazil.
In Britain. And you got this whole uniform.
Yes.
It's absolutely marvellous to have it so complete.
Well, I'm afraid I lost his medal as well, or at least the medals weren't with
What
it.
a shame, what a shame. And you've got all his documentary evidence here in his logbooks and all his letters, which must make fascinating reading. And this, of course, is a likeness of him.
Yes,
I must say that it's a likeness of you, too.
Oh,
I can see the family resemblance. In the photograph, it looks as though he's lost an arm.
Yes, he lost it when he was about 25. And he had a duel with an Admiral Brown.
Swords?
No, pistols.
Pistols?
And he actually lost his arm with a ball.
Really? I noticed that it's got the emblem of Brazil here, which is a globe. And they used that at the time on their coins as well. The sword itself is beautifully blued and gilt, and that is in lovely condition. And of course this beautiful cocked hat. To make a valuation on such a thing, I can only equate it to a British naval uniform of the period. With the background that it has, it would be something like £4,000 to £6,000. I'm very pleased you're here with it today. Very pleased. Thank you.
That's all right. Thank you very much.
Very different sort of doll to the usual. It's got a key. Do you know what they're called? No. They're called autoperipateticus. Self-propelled walking. Now, she's propelled by these 2 feet, and of course you have this cardboard skirt which contains the mechanism that makes her walk. Does she walk?
Yes, she does. She's a bit tottery.
Yes. Lovely dress. Yes. Let's see. Oh, she's got a very good movement. She's one of the early autoperipateticus. It was patented in England by William Clark in 1862. The arms are very fragile and almost the only thing that's showing a bit of wear. Kid arms, separately stitched fingers. There's a lot of work in it. And they had very pretty silk taffeta dresses, which it is. I'm fascinated to know who's been playing with it, because it must have been a very, very good little girl.
Yes, I don't know how much she did play with it. It was my great-great-aunt, my grandmother's aunt.
Beautifully kept. And in this condition, which is almost mint, she'd probably make somewhere in the region of £800 to £1,000.
Really? Valuable little doll.
Now, I have to tell you, this type of furniture has John Bly scratching his head.
It has?
Yeah, words like, "You cannot be serious, Eric," etc. Yeah. He's such a purist. But I have to tell you, it has me scratching my head to some degree.
This has?
Well, the reason is that this type of furniture has always been something of an enigma. It's been in your family for a good number of years, I assume?
To my knowledge.
Right. Well, let's get its nationality sorted out.
Yeah.
Now, we're here in the Principality, but it's from over the border. It's English.
Oh.
All right. Date-wise, let's go back as far as about 1900, maybe 1905. But let's start at the bottom with these slender legs that terminate with these small plinths. This apron carved with this very stylized flower head. This is the thing that hits you first of all, because you're looking at a piece that is decorated in the Art Nouveau style of the 1900 period. You can see how it's very much a symmetrical design. The stem follows the apron through, and then in a small whiplash type motif extends to the other side where it's mirrored. This particular motif, almost in the form of a stylized shrub, inlaid with various fruit woods and mother of pearl inlay there in the centre. I particularly like the handles.
Yeah. What's so special about them?
Well, it's just that they've been given that little bit of extra with these little floret or these tendril type exam pieces here. and they just blend so nicely with a piece. I mean, it is a display cabinet,
definitely,
but it is something of a distraction because your eye is more taken with the object. And I feel sorry for anything that you would have to put in here because it's lost, really, isn't it? If I had to say who this particular display cabinet was by, I could only hazard that it is possibly by a firm called J.S. Henry. J.S. Henry. They were based in the East End of London, and I've come across their trade catalogue only a few years ago, in which they show lots and lots of this type of display cabinet. So I can't be 100% certain.
No.
One thing I can be certain of is that I personally like it. Does it have pride of place in your house?
Yeah, but the comments of people who've seen it, some love it and some say, I wouldn't have it in my house.
Well, that's
but
probably
I like it.
That's probably the difference between the way I look at it and the way that John Bly looks at it. But either way, if you wanted to replace it today, and you'd find it very difficult, because to find one that's identical, virtually impossible, you would have to part with the best part of around about £1,000 for it.
£1,000.
Very often with silver, you can actually date it almost before you pick it up. When you get a piece like this, it's clearly Victorian. It's ornate. It's not heavily embossed as one often sees, but it is nicely engraved. Chased all over, nice beaded top. It's made by the Barnard brothers in 1855. But the bad news is, although it's here a cream jug, it's not a cream jug. It wasn't a cream jug. It was a christening mug. This has been added at a later date.
Okay.
And turn it into a more useful item, but completely illegal to sell it. So under no circumstances could you sell that on the open market today. If you look at it, you can actually see here where it's gone into the engraving, which would have followed round. Illegal alteration. You can offer it for sale if it's re-hallmarked. What you can't do is offer it for sale as it stands now. You can use it and enjoy it. Much more useful as a cream jug. So that's the bad news. When you look at a piece like that, it shrieks. Georgian, one of the most elegant designs, I think, of Georgian coffee pots. If you look at the marks underneath, it's a 1775 mark. The JS was originally attributed to John Swift, but later thoughts on it is probably more likely to be James Stamp. But very fine pot. It's got a lovely patina on it. I mean, you can almost feel it, you know, the wear that it's had over the years. The nice part about it is this lovely pineapple finial. Now, more often than not, these are ivory. It's not very often that you come across one that's actually modelled in silver, so it's another very nice feature about it. Tell me a little bit about it. What do you think?
Well, I couldn't see somebody sitting down and pouring coffee into it. I would think it was a chocolate pot myself.
I'd love to have my coffee from it. Let me tell you the difference. If this had been a chocolate pot, this would have been hinged and open up to reveal a hole in the top. You would have had a stirring rod to go down because chocolate congealed very quickly, so you need a little stirring rod in it. That's the difference between a coffee pot and a chocolate pot. Value, you would expect at auction today to get in excess of £2,000 for it.
Well, one please.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Well, is that who I think it is?
Well, I've suggested Pearson. What do you
John
think?
Pearson, yes. Yeah, I would have thought so.
It's not Newlyn. I mean, it's stronger and better than Newlyn, I think.
It's a beast you wouldn't want to meet on a dark night,
Certainly.
isn't it?
Quite a fearsome peacock, if that's what he is.
Whacking big piece of copper. I've seen a lot of copper listed today, but look at this. Look at this, it's just turned up. I thought you might like this.
The same date.
It's not often that we get good posters coming through.
Good graphics.
This is actually in a contemporary frame as well. But there's the artist down there. Privat Livemont.
Yes.
And contemporary Mucha.
Well, it's very much in Mucha style.
Isn't it just?
Do you think it's a poster?
I think it is. Obviously, you know, the problem with posters is that with something like this is that you want to see if the margins are
or what the image, what it was advertising.
A little inscription down here, written in French, dated 1906.
Which is just right. How much?
Ooh, I'd have to do some research, but several hundred.
I would have thought
hundreds. Fair to say, several hundred.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. That's classic. Those are the classic Welsh patterns. And look at the borders. Those brownish borders.
Yes,
but this is better than the standard run-of-the-mill designs, this is very, very good quality. Which means it could have been made at Swansea, but there are also lots of other places that made just as good quality. As far as the dating of the Swansea pottery is concerned, those pieces were dated 1840, 1850, so obviously we're in the right period, there's no problem.
But it's that handle shape that I'd like somebody to show me. Could you tell us really where you got this from? Is this a family thing?
Yes, it is a family thing. It belonged to my great-great-grandmother, and it's come down to me. I'm an only child. Dad was an only child. Mum was an only child.
So I'm an only child. We're related.
Really?
Well, but does this have a connection with Swansea, or did your grandmother come from somewhere else?
No, my grandmother came from the Llandilo area.
Well, that's where you had the problem.
And that is not very far from Swansea. Is it a very valuable thing?
It's a blue and white collection. I think that's 120, 180 pounds.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say 150, which is very, yes, 150 pounds.
Thank you.
That's a very nice book.
A lot more value to you.
I won't sell it.
Exactly. No, don't hold it by the handle.
No, yes, that's it. I got there in time. Got there in time.
We were saying earlier how the whole history of this part of Wales is associated in some way or other with the woolen industry. There were 4 mills here in Newcastle Emlyn, and before the mills, John, I suppose, every cottage had its own spinning wheel.
Every cottage, every farmhouse, and in fact every important house in the area.
So you start with this, with the wool off the back of the sheep, quite literally.
And then you twisted it. And this was the earliest form of twisting the wool into a yarn from which you can make your cloth. This, of course, occupied both hands fully and was restricted. Around about the 9th century, we imported from India the idea of making it horizontal. So you had a wheel that went that way, and your spinning all of a sudden allowed your hands to be free. The first major type was this, known in Wales as the Great Wheel, Scotland, the Muckle Wheel, in America, the Walking Wheel. Basically, very simple, one revolution of that, spun many times, this little bobbin here, you spun onto it. The next great development was this, the flyer. And that enabled the distribution of the yarn on the bobbin and equal spacing. And that really is how it took off.
So before the Industrial Revolution, virtually every cottage, every house, not only in Wales, but in the rest of the country, every humble house, they were making their own clothes from a spinning wheel such as that.
And the other fascinating thing, too, is, of course, that almost like inverted snobbery, what was a cottage industry became a fashionable pastime for rich young ladies.
Oh, really?
By the 1760s, 1770s, they had tabletop models, and they were spinning silk.
Here's one I made earlier.
Not far off, actually. This is solid rosewood, inlaid with mother of pearl, and it's a replica of a lady's laptop or tabletop spinning wheel from about 1780, 1790.
Unlike the others, of course, which are traditional and come from the Welsh Woollen Museum.
Yes, yes.
English porcelain plaques are made of English soft bone china. German porcelain plaques, which are renowned for their quality, and we've seen a number of them on the show, are made of hard paste porcelain. Now, when you paint enamels onto soft paste bone china, the enamels have the effect of sinking in slightly into the glaze, and it gives this terrific soft texture to the surface. Whereas German porcelain plaques, however good they are, have this very flinty, sharp feel to them. And this is, for me, a superb piece of not only landscape painting, but also still life. Here in the upper half, it's almost a separate piece of landscape painting. We have the white water of a mountain river through which these presumably salmon or rainbow trout, I'm afraid I'm not a fisherman, so I don't know.
They're rainbow trout.
They're rainbow trout, good. That's what I thought. Are lying in front of the river. Presumably they've recently been caught in. The major part of its value comes from not which factory made it, but the quality of the painting, this wonderful soft enameling on bone china porcelain. Added to this, you've got a sporting subject, and it's a classic case of the subject matter adding to the value of a painting. If you were to sell it in either a sporting context, a fishing, angling context, or in a fine porcelain context, I think you would probably get a price between £1,500 and £2,000.
Very good.
I'm 70 now, and I bought them when I was about 22.
The
glasses of this type engraved with a rose and buds, very much associated with the Jacobite traditions, as you probably know. But here Ewan's got, in addition, an engraved initial. Do you know what the initials are?
No, I don't. I've no idea.
Because one has a border here, known as an OXO border, that is design engraved on there, which really places them in the 1775, 1780 period, really too late for real Jacobite involvement. But jolly nice glasses all the same. Can you remember what they cost back in those days?
Yes, £4.10 for the pair.
Right. Which was a fair bit of money at the time.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Oh, yes.
that's right. I mean, nowadays, a good wine glass of this period with initials is probably about £350, and a tumbler, much the same, something like that. But what was here is a very rare shape indeed. It's a Toastmaster's glass, which obviously would link up with being used in a lodge. The heavy base is for banging a table. You bang it and give a toast, and then down it in one, but you wouldn't get totally sozzled because you're only drinking a little measure. So, I mean, Bealby glasses, any white enamelling, add enormously to the value of a glass. So having an inscription on Bealby is rare, but to be a Toastmaster's glass as well, with a very unusual form of twisted stem, air twist stem, and a heavy put. It's really got everything. It's almost such a rarity, and hard to think what it would be worth. I suppose to a collector, 7,000–8,000.
Good Lord. I hadn't realised it was worth so much. I've lost touch with prices these days, and I find that quite shattering.
It's supposed to be a late 16th century, about 1580, watch known as a tambour watch, because it's actually drum-shaped. And it's the earliest type of watch really ever made, because it was only in the beginning of the 16th century that they could make little springs. Before that, you had to have weight. And the first watches were this size, and they were about 1570. Now, unfortunately, it isn't that. It's a fake made in about 1880 or 1890 as exactly of one of those watches, and incorporating probably even patterns made from the original cases. Well, having said it's a fake, it wasn't made to deceive. And the reason you can tell it's not a fake is there's a tiny little hallmark inside, and you'd never hallmark it with a modern mark of 1880 if in fact it was supposed to be a fake of the 16th century. Well, the good news perhaps is it's still worth £500, £400–500.
Yeah.
The bad news is that if it was late 16th century, it'd be worth about £30,000.
What a shame it's not that.
It's painted. It's not inlaid, as you know. It's a painted finish, and the wonderful thing about it is that on the top and also on the base of the table, its original paint finish has survived pretty well intact. Yes. There are very few areas of damage, which is amazing to see. Yes. But the really interesting thing is round the back here. And the sophistication of this table, I think, is apparent in that although it's only a painted finish, they have taken the trouble to coat the cheap pine of which the table is made with canvas to achieve a really fine finish surface for the painting.
Is canvas underneath as well as on top?
Yes. Yes. I mean, the paint is just like a picture.
Yeah.
It is
That's right,
painted
yes.
onto the canvas, which has been stuck on the table. And it's absolutely fantastic to see it unrestored.
I thought it looked French.
No, it's English. There's no doubt at all that it's English. It was made any time between 1790-ish and 1810. If that was in a good London antique dealer's, this will be priced without any doubt at a minimum of £3,000. No doubt. It's, I think, a most curious beast. You've never seen a cat quite like it, have you?
No, not really.
Cats don't really come in this sort of rather
Hardly,
fattened, angular form, do they?
No.
It was designed by a very strange artist called Louis Wain, and his name is here on the front feet. He designed this very strange cat in the 1920s, reflecting a popular enthusiasm for Art Deco, for Cubism, for all the styles really of the 1920s.
Louis Wain was a most odd man. He was an artist who specialised in cat subjects, and he had a very checkered career. He ended up, I'm afraid, completely mad because he had been taken over by the creatures he'd created. He was well known as a book illustrator and painter before the First World War, and one of his last creations, really, was this. They were made in Central Europe, in Czechoslovakia. They come in different sizes, and they are an extraordinary reflection, I think, of the interest in popular art that was current at that time.
Yes.
You've also got to remember this was the period of Mickey Mouse. This was the period when cartoon characters were taking cats and animals into different directions. We had Felix the cat, who was really a sort of contemporary of this.
Yes.
And that sort of slightly lunatic element of presenting animals was, again, very characteristic at the time. What would you pay for it if you saw it in a shop?
Well, I couldn't pay very much because I haven't the money to pay for it, but I'd expect to pay about £100.
£100. Well, we're getting there. In fact, this at auction would probably fetch somewhere between £300 and £500. So it's a very expensive cat indeed.
It is.
Well, when this was made, this extraordinary piece of wood was probably referred to as Jamaica wood. We would call it Spanish mahogany. Because Jamaica and Cuba are always ports of Spain, and they imported huge bulks of this wonderful, dense, hard timber. You imagine this was cut from one block so big, because that part corresponds entirely to that, and would make a sandwich with this. They simply sliced it like that and made a large table. And basically, it's probably the simplest form of table that you could wish for, isn't it? I mean, the two legs pull out each side and support the top and give you enough room to seat, what, 10 people? You get 10 people around it?
About 10, I think. We have sat 12 around it. But,
yes, bit of a squash.
Bit of a squash.
It's jolly friendly at the end of the meal.
It is, yeah, it is, yes.
And is it a family one? It's been in the family?
It is very much so, yes. It was my grandfather's.
Right.
And possibly further back than that. And he came over to Ireland, I suppose, in the 30s. He was a rector in the Church of Ireland and then Church of England in Sussex.
Well, that ties up very well, because I'm sure that you know it as a wake table, which is its popular term. I mean, officially it's simply a drop-leaf table. But they are peculiar to Ireland in this particular shape, where the leaves are the long way of the table. And of course, the romantic story is, because they put the coffin on here and then have the wake around it. I don't think that's ever really true. There were hundreds of them made, or probably thousands, but because of their use, they've got damaged. Because of the horrendous, wonderful parties that must have been held on top, they've always got damaged. When they are in good condition, then they can be very collectible, very desirable items. This is a serious piece of furniture. The nice thing is that the frame of this is totally original to the top. And there are a couple of things you look for. When you look underneath here, as you pull the arm out, there's a great gouge underneath where the arm has swung backwards and forwards and caused that compatible sign of wear. Very important. And the other thing, it's only a tiny detail. On the frame, you'll notice there are 3 little black marks, really like pinheads. They correspond to the hinge, and the 3 screws in the hinge have rusted and oxidized the work.
Right.
Now, nobody faking a table or matching top to bottom would ever think of doing that.
Right.
So to me, that little detail is magic, you see. Makes a lot of difference.
That's marvellous, yeah.
Because a table like that, in this condition, bearing in mind it was probably made about 1765, 1775, that sort of period, today is worth a lot of money. One of these turned up 18 months ago and made £21,000.
I wondered, with the various coins and bullion here, whether he was the mint master, but perhaps he is just a bullion dealer. Now, can you tell anything about the history of the picture and how it came to you?
Yes, my father was an assayer and chief chemist of a large London gold refining company, and he was there for some 53 years.
Yes.
When he retired, they gave him to this, and to this day he thinks it was a little bit of a joke.
Why the joke? I mean, I think would it be a marvellous thing to have and take away from
Possibly the size.
Yes. I think that probably the key to this picture is that it is bullion rather than the mint master, because here, where they have the molten metals, it's being put into cast there, and we can see the bars lying here. With the manufacture of coins, if I'm not wrong, they were stamped out. But I think we must look round this picture for all the details and all the clues. He is, in fact, here with a book which appears to be a book on the records of coins. But here it seems to be a piece of silver, piece of gold bullion, 1 or 2 coins, and here, fascinatingly, the clippers, which were probably there to trim the various metals into their correct weights, and the scales here to make sure that everything is in order. I would have thought that it's a painting of the 1720s, 30s, 40s, something towards the middle of the 18th century. I don't think it's English, and my feeling is that it's Dutch. Where's it hung in your house? Has it been such a large one?
For the last 25 years, it's been wrapped and put away because it's a little bit big for the normal house.
Yes.
But it's just come out again, and as you say, it wants cleaning.
Well, I think you probably realise that if it actually was cleaned, all these colours would come out of it, and it would actually look absolutely marvellous. We don't quite know who it is, what it's exactly of, or who the artist is. And I think all these particular bits of information need to come together before one can put a really specific figure on it. When I saw it coming in, I thought, well, you know, it's 10, possibly 15,000. But quite frankly, I think to the right person, and with this additional information, one might even think of 20, £25,000.
Never.
And I can't actually be sure about that.
Good Lord.
But I don't think we must get too excited. But does that surprise you?
Very, very much so. Considering 2 years ago, a gentleman looked at it and said, it's a fake, I'll give you £80 for it.
Well, in fact, yes, I take it you don't see him too often.
Not too often, no.
Well, I must say we've had a marvellous day here in Wales today. It's exceeded even our greatest expectations, not only the sheer numbers of people who've come along to our Antiques Roadshow, but also the quality of the things that they've brought with them. The silver, the pottery, the porcelain, the paintings, they've all been fine and great stories behind them. And there are other stories too. Someone told me, of course, you know, it was here in Newcastle Emlyn that the last dragon to be slain in Wales was killed. Of course, that could have been just another case of someone spinning a yarn. And someone else, a little lady, must have been about 80, she said to me, you know, you're the best thing that's happened here since the wrestling. Well, that's nice to hear. Next week, we're off to Yorkshire. I very much hope you'll join us then. Until then, from all of us here in West Wales,